Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 7, a voice moved into your head and never left. It comments on your decisions. It argues with you at 2 a.m. It sounds exactly like you. But neuroscience has found that voice was built out of someone else entirely. And you were never told who. Most people assume the voice in their head is simply thought made audible. A private soundtrack that belongs to them, generated by them, under their control. That assumption is almost completely wrong. Let's start with what we know for certain. Before you had an inner voice, you had something stranger. In the 1920s, Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget observed young children talking to themselves out loud while they played. Not to anyone, just narrating. The block goes here. Now the truck. Piaget assumed this was meaningless. A leftover habit children would eventually outgrow, evidence that a child's mind couldn't yet tell the difference between thinking and speaking. A few years later, Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky looked at the exact same behavior and reached the opposite conclusion. Vygotsky argued that this out-loud self-talk wasn't meaningless at all. It was thinking, caught in the act of formation. He proposed something radical for the time. Children first learn to think through conversations with other people, parents, siblings, teachers, and that external social speech gradually moves inward. It doesn't disappear when a child stops talking to themselves out loud. It goes underground. It becomes silent. It becomes the voice in your head. For decades, this was just theory. Then modern neuroscience found a way to test it. Here's where it gets strange. In 2011, cognitive scientist Charles Fernyhough at Durham University began using a technique called descriptive experience sampling. Participants carried devices that beeped randomly throughout the day. The moment it beeped, they wrote down exactly what was happening in their mind. Not what they thought they usually experienced, what was happening right then. What Fernyhough's team found broke the assumption that inner speech is one continuous, uniform narrator. Some people reported almost no inner voice at all. Others reported several distinct voices running simultaneously, sometimes arguing with each other. And in a striking number of cases, participants described their inner voice using someone else's actual identity. A mother's tone of disapproval, a teacher's exact phrasing, an ex-partner's sarcasm, word for word. This is where Vygotsky's old theory stopped being philosophy and became measurable. Your inner voice isn't manufactured from nothing inside your skull. It's assembled, piece by piece in early childhood, from the actual voices of the people who talk to you the most. Their rhythms, their favorite phrases, their judgments. You didn't invent your inner narrator, you absorbed it. But it gets stranger still. In 2000, neuroscientist Sarah Blakemore at University College London studied something called corollary discharge, the brain's system for predicting the sensory consequences of its own actions. It's the same system that stops you from being able to tickle yourself. Your brain predicts the sensation before it happens, and the surprise, the part that makes tickling work, disappears. Blakemore found that inner speech uses this exact same prediction system. When you generate a thought in words, a part of your brain sends out a kind of internal memo. This voice is coming from me. Don't treat it as external. That memo is why your inner voice doesn't feel like being spoken to. It feels like you. But when that internal memo fails to arrive, when the brain generates inner speech without correctly tagging it as self-produced, the result is a voice that feels like it belongs to someone else entirely. This is one of the leading theories behind auditory verbal hallucinations. Not a supernatural intrusion, not a broken mind, a misfiled internal memo, the same machinery that gives you your inner voice malfunctioning by a matter of milliseconds, which means the line between the voice in your head and a voice that isn't yours is not a wall. It's a signal, and that signal can fail. There's another layer most people never learn because it isn't about whether you have this voice, it's about what shape it takes. In 2019, a research team led by linguist Jackson Kirkham-Knight surveyed inner speech across multiple language groups and found something unexpected. People don't just think in their native language, they think with its grammar built in, its sentence order, its habits of blame and agency. Some languages structure sentences so the person doing an action sits at the center of the sentence. Others structure sentences so the event itself sits at the center and the person almost disappears. Speakers of those second languages, the researchers found, were measurably less likely to mentally narrate personal mistakes as "I broke it," and more likely to narrate them as "it broke," a different relationship between the self and blame built directly into the architecture of the inner voice. The voice in your head isn't just borrowed from people, it's borrowed from a language with an entire culture's assumptions about fault and identity preloaded into its grammar, which means two people who grew up speaking different languages aren't just translating the same inner monologue into different words. They may be running two structurally different self-narrators. And for some people, there's no narrator running at all. Studies using descriptive experience sampling have found that a meaningful percentage of people report almost no inner monologue whatsoever, a condition researchers now sometimes call an endophasia. These are not people with a quieter inner voice. They report none. No sentences narrating their day, no internal commentary on decisions, no rehearsed arguments at 2 a.m. Instead, they describe thinking in images, physical impulses, or a kind of wordless intention that resolves directly into action. For decades, many of these people assumed everyone else was speaking in metaphor when they described an inner voice, that hearing yourself think was just a figure of speech. It wasn't. For a large portion of the population, that sentence is literal. For another portion, it describes something that has simply never happened to them. Now here's the part almost nobody talks about, because it changes how you should be using this voice, not just how it was built. In 2014, psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan ran a series of experiments on something called self-distancing. Kross had participants prepare for a stressful task, a public speech, while narrating their anxiety to themselves in one of two ways. One group used first person. "I'm nervous, I don't know if I can do this." The other group used their own name, or the word you. "You're nervous. You've got this." The results were not subtle. People who addressed themselves in the second or third person performed better, reported less anxiety, and recovered from stress faster than those who used I. Kross's explanation ties directly back to Vygotsky and Fernyhough. When you say I, your inner voice is fused with you completely. Every fear feels like an unquestionable fact. When you say you, or your own name, you're accessing the same social machinery that built your inner voice in the first place. You're talking to yourself the way another person once talked to you. And that distance, borrowed distance, is enough to change how the fear is processed. So the voice in your head that comforts you when you're afraid and the voice that tears you apart at 2 a.m. aren't actually two different systems. They're the same machinery, running two different recordings, one assembled from someone who was gentle with you, one assembled from someone who wasn't. Think about what that means the next time that voice turns cruel. It's not an objective judge delivering a verdict on your worth. It's a recording. Somebody's old tone of voice, filed away before you were old enough to question it, replaying itself as if it were your own conclusion. You didn't choose whose tape got left running. Which raises the real question. If the voice was built piece by piece out of other people's voices and other people's languages during years you don't even remember, whose voice is actually running your mind right now? Whose sentence structure do you use when you criticize yourself? Whose exact tone shows up when you're disappointed in your own decisions? For most people, the honest answer, if they actually stop and listen, is unsettling. It's not a stranger's voice exactly, but it's not entirely yours either. Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 7, a voice moved into your head and never left. You've been listening to it every day since, mistaking it for the sound of your own mind. It isn't. It's a composite, built from every person who ever spoke to you before you could speak to yourself, filtered through a language you didn't choose either. And the next time it says something cruel about you at 2 a.m., it's worth remembering. That's not a verdict. That's just an old recording, playing back exactly the way it was taught to.